Выхожу один я на дорогу, сквозь туман кремнистый путь блестит. Ночь тиха, пустыня внемлет Богу, и звезда звездою говорит. Ночь тиха, пустыня внемлет Богу, и звезда звездою говорит. В небесах торжественно и чудно спит земля в сиянии голубом. Что же мне так больно и так трудно? Жду чего? Жалею ли о чем? Что же мне так больно и так трудно? Жду чего? Жалею ли о чем? Пусть не жду от жизни ничего я, и не жаль мне прошлого ничуть. Я еще свободы и покоя я хотел забыться и заснуть. Я еще свободы и покоя я хотел забыться и заснуть.
Wet Meadow, a piece by Fyodor Vasilyev, was a part of the Pedovishniki art period in Russia, which focused on everyday life through landscapes and countryside life. Pedovishniki means wanderer and showed wheat fields, pine forests, and water meadows. Artists showed everyday life of Russians, depicting rural life of workers, farmers, and laborers. At the time, in the 1870s, showing commoners was considered radical and helped form national pride among the proletariat. The artists were not in it for personal recognition or individual glory, but to bring about social and political change. The subjects of their pieces lived through serfdom, which was abolished February 19, 1861. Pedovishniki laid the foundation for the ideas of the Russian Revolution of 1917. In the mid-19th century, artists in France had a similar social movement. The Paris Commune of 1870 was unsuccessful, yet was an influential social revolt against the French government. Victor Hugo say Les Mis is written for all nations, I do not know whether it will be read by all, but I wrote it for all. It is addressed to England as well to Spain, to Italy as well as to France, to Germany as well, to Ireland, to the republics which have slaves, as well as to empires which have serfs. Social problems surpass frontiers. The sores of the human race, those great sores which cover the globe, do not halt at red or blue lines traced upon the map. In every place where man is ignorant and despairing, in every place where a woman is sold for bread, whether the child suffers for lack of the book which should instruct them, and of the hearth which should warm him, the book Les Mis knocks at the door and says, "Open to me, I come for you." Les Mis is set during the Paris Commune of 1871, which was the third uprising of the working class. It came after the uprising in June 1848 and the coup of 1851 that brought Napoleon to power. Napoleon's empire stripped the working class of their rights, created economic divides between the working and upper class, and pursued war at the cost of the French people. In August of 1870, he marched against Germany as he claimed it would strengthen the country and the economy. To fund the war, resources such as food and funds were diverted from the public for the troops. After his second attempt to invade Germany, protests called for an end to overthrow the power-hungry Napoleon. By September 4th, the Prussians encircled Paris, and inside, the government of national defense was established to maintain capitalist control of the working class for the French upper class. At first, workers supported them. However, the government of national defense would begin negotiations with Bismarck, led by General Trousseau. The effects of the siege were mostly felt by the working class. Resources such as food became expensive beyond their means to afford. The government was indifferent to the poverty and famine French workers faced, which made revolution the only answer. General Trousseau resigned after he failed to take Buzenval on January 19th. Under the threat of invasion by the Prussians, the Central Committee was created by the National Guard. The National Guard, led by Clement Thomas, would eventually be ordered to open fire on workers, but they would not obey this command. The Commune would eventually replace the National Guard as the presiding government in Paris. This new government resembled the Jacobins from the French Revolution in their stripping corrupt politicians of power, representing workers and farmers, and acting succinctly against the tyranny of economic elites. The Commune ended privileges of state officials, rents were frozen, workshops were run by the workers, night work was limited, and guaranteed provisions for the poor and the sick were made. The population that had been abused and neglected at the hand of their own government now seized power from the economic elite. The Commune strove to end anarchic and ruinous competition between workers for the profit of capitalists, and the dissemination of socialist ideals. Church was separated from the state, homes and public buildings opened for the homeless, public education open to all. People who had been excluded from government decisions and the political process were encouraged to meet and organize for better ways of living. Social progress was brought about through the emancipation of wage workers. The end of the Commune came on May 2nd, 1871, when the troops of Versailles entered the city and defeated the National Guard, killing 50,000 civilians. The Industrial Revolution of France began with railways, and economic slums were expanded in trade and agriculture. As machines replaced men in labor, the brunt of economic collapse was felt by the working class. The technological advancements in machinery competed with manual labor. Workers were either driven out of jobs or factories and mines opted for child and women labor, which they could pay less for. In Britain, steam engines lowered the cost of transportation, agriculture required less manual labor, and large numbers flocked to cities. Just as slavery was reinvigorated by the cotton gin in America, the loom drove demand for garments. While some of society benefited from modernization, it was at the detriment of the working class. Just as France saw the stratification between factory owners and the working class with minimal government regulation. Long workdays, lax safety regulations, low wages, and indifference to the living conditions of the working class grew under Adam Smith's laissez-faire economic model, which allowed businesses to increase production and lower marginal utility costs. Between 1850 and 1914, at least 90,000 miners died in the United Kingdom, numbers that mine owners were indifferent to. They were driven to ignore occupational hazards, high death rates, and injuries. Solidarity between workers was discouraged because mine owners did not want to lower productivity, raise wages, or consider the safety of their employees in the best interests of their profits. 4 years before the Communist Manifesto was written by Marx, Frederick Engels wrote The Condition of the Working Class in England based on neighborhoods of Manchester. Extreme poverty, poor living conditions, and little sanitation were directly tied to the cheap wage labor laissez-faire capitalists demanded. Orphans were free labor, and children worked to maintain machinery with no protection. Michael Ward was a doctor in Manchester. He often treated children injured at work and was interviewed by the House of Lords Committee March 25, 1819. He said, "Through the children's hands and arms having been caught in machinery, in many instances the muscles and the skin is stripped down to the bone, and in some instances a finger or two may be lost. Last summer I visited near Lever Street School. The number of children at the time in the school who were employed in factories was 106. The number of children who had received injuries from machinery amounted to very nearly one half. There were 47 injured in this way." The Sadler Committee report of 1832 unveiled children and women being beaten into productivity, overworked, and underpaid in textile factories. To meet the demand of factory owners, 16-hour days were the norm. Elizabeth Bentley began work at 6 at a flax mill and was beaten for mistakes. This report gave way to the Act of 1833 that limited hours. The Ashley Commission on the Mines and the Chadwick Report on Sanitation reported on social issues caused by industrialization and capitalism. Edwin Chadwick's report on the sanitary conditions of the laboring population of Great Britain in 1842 studied the life expectancy of workers in rural areas compared to cities. In the countryside, he found the life expectancy was longer than in industrialized cities such as Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, and Bolton. His research also found those in professional trades lived longer than tradesmen and laborers. In Bolton, the life expectancy for a professional tradesman was 34, compared to just 23 of tradesmen and 18 of laborers. In Manchester, the life expectancy of professional tradesmen was 38, compared to just 20 and 17 of tradesmen and laborers. In Liverpool, the life expectancy was 35, compared to just 22 of tradesmen and 15 of laborers. In Leeds, the life expectancy of professional tradesmen was 44 and was just 19 of laborers. In Rutland, professional tradesmen had a life expectancy of 52, while laborers were only expected to live to 38. Just as miners, factory workers, and wage earners were at the mercy of business owners during serfdom and the Industrial Revolution, today workers find themselves in an identical circumstance. Amazon, Tesla, Whole Foods, and agricultural workers have been deemed essential workers, yet their employers do not provide them with health care, livable wages, paid sick leave, or maternal or paternal leave. By hiring contract employees and part-time labor, billionaires are not held accountable for the well-being of their workers. Candace Dixon, who worked for Amazon, was forced to meet her quota at the warehouse, otherwise be fired. She had to scan 300 items per hour and pick up items from the conveyor belt. After 2 months on the job, this destroyed her back. An Amazon-approved doctor determined she had a bulging disc, a back sprain, and chronic pain brought on by her job. Amazon's fulfillment centers have over double the serious injury incidents than the national average. Just from full-time workers, 9.6 were reported seriously injured compared to the national average of 4%. Jeff Bezos has personally benefited from the hazardous conditions he keeps his workers in, and even in the face of a global pandemic, does not value their lives. The physical exhaustion of 12-hour workdays and even a maintenance worker's death have been largely overlooked by the government. The lack of regulation and greed of Jeff Bezos has a very real human cost. Dixon said, for Amazon, all they care about is getting the job done and getting out fast, and not realizing how it's affecting us and our bodies. The investigation of a maintenance worker's death by Indiana state officials sided with Amazon over their own investigator. It should not come as a surprise because at the time the state was trying to get a second headquarters. Amazon gives a lot of energy and capital to prevent workers from unionizing because they do not want to provide health care or establish safety protocol in order to keep productivity high and Bezos' pockets lined. They even have an anti-union training video for new employees that's 45 minutes long. Today's political and economic environment mirrors the peasants' revolt across England in 1381. Following the Black Plague of the 1340s, which killed half of the population in Europe, it increased demand for manual labor in agriculture. This gave more power to peasants who wanted to increase their pay. The class of peasants had next to no rights working on their lord's land and had to pay taxes. The landowners fought increasing wages of peasants. The Ordinance of Laborers was passed in 1349, and the Statute of Laborers was passed in 1351. Both tried to fix wages at pre-plague prices, made it a crime to refuse work or break a contract, and would impose fines otherwise. In southeast England, peasants found opportunities by leaving work to seek different employers, began to specialize in manufacturing goods, and left their lords' households. In the decades following the Black plague between 1340 and 1880s, the purchasing power of rural laborers increased by 40%. At the same time of economic shifts, England was engaged in the Hundred Years' War with France. The cost of war was high. The garrisons at Calais and Brest cost €36,000 a year to maintain, and the military expeditions cost €50,000 every 6 months. In the upper class, lords, who were aristocracy, and clergy were affected less by taxation than the commons, who were merchants, senior gentry, and knights. Parliament introduced the poll tax, which was 4 pence for every person above the age of 14. The first poll tax raised €22,000 to fund the war. A second poll tax was introduced, and the revolt began after John Bampton attempted to collect unpaid poll taxes on May 30th, 1381, in the Essex village of Fobbing. The next month, when troops were deployed to suppress peasants, they were again met by a mob. An uprising of peasants left to march on London. Communities from Norfolk and Suffolk attacked Rochester Castle. By the time they reached London, their numbers had grown to over 60,000, and they destroyed tax records and burnt down buildings that stored government records. Leading the peasants was Wat Tyler. They were able to enter the city after townspeople left the gates unlocked. After meeting with King Richard II, he promised to end serfdom and feudalism. By the end of the peasants' revolt, the poll tax had been removed. During the Industrial Revolution, the French Commune, the peasants' revolt, working-class uprisings stripped the ruling class of their power. Economic crises caused by war in France made social change possible, just as in England a reduced number of laborers due to the Black Plague gave peasants an opportunity for social change. Just as in previous labor revolutions it created a more equal playing field, it is inevitable that today's climate will produce similar results. The Gilets jaunes in France began from a fuel tax which negatively impacted the working class. The price of diesel had already risen by 23 cents, and between 2000 and 2010, 75% of growth occurred in the metropolitan areas, and their GDP is 50% higher than the rest of the country. The Gilets jaunes protests involved over 280,000 French and endured over a year, yet has not been covered at all by American mainstream media.
Прости, звезда, пора мне спать, но жаль расстаться мне с тобою. С тобою я привык мечтать. Прелестная звезда, порою ярко так сияешь, и сердцу бедному тогда где ярко светишь ты, стремятся все мои